Howdy, friends. Week 1 of the NFL is now in the books, and that means that we are into primetime overreaction season. But before we get into some of the overreactions from Week 1, I just wanted to address a couple of stories. First off, the Antonio Brown thing. I mean, it seems pretty obvious now that he was playing the Raiders, trying to get fired the whole time with the whole helmet dispute, fighting with Mike Mayock. You know, if you see some of the private videos that Antonio Brown released, I mean, they're just so self-incriminating. Like the one where when he first got fired and he calls his grandma and he's celebrating, yeah, we got fired. Like it was something that he had obviously talked with his grandma about before, you know, like, hey, man, hey, grandma, I'm trying to get fired here from the Raiders, you know, so like that's a good result. Because when you ever call somebody and you know, excited that you got fired, you know, and excited that you lost, what did he lose, $20 million guaranteed, $30 million guaranteed, something crazy like that? You know, I'm a bit of a natural conspiracy theorist as is, and I am definitely a Patriots hater being a Dolphins fan. I'll admit that. And, you know, Patriots are kind of known for their scheming and, you know, cheating throughout the years. So I'm not sure if, you know, any repercussions can actually ever come from this. Like, I don't know if it's actually going to be provable that the Patriots coerced Brown into getting fired from the Raiders. And even if they did coerce him, I'm not sure if that is even technically illegal, which just that's just how smart the Patriots are. You know, they like to just toe that gray line of cheating. They're really a bunch of assholes over there in New England, you know. But let's leave that Antonio Brown thing in the dust. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that, you know, the Steelers would never have traded Antonio Brown to the Patriots, and AB, you know, would love to play on a great team like the Patriots that, you know, obviously Super Bowl contenders every year. And I think that this is this season, by far the most talented Patriots roster since they went 16-0 in 2008 or whatever year that was. You know, with Josh Gordon on the opposite side of Antonio Brown, Julian Edelman, maybe the best slot receiver in the game over there, James White, one of the best receivers out of the backfield, Sony Michel, who absolutely screwed me in Week 1 of fantasy football out there at running back. I mean, they're just absolutely stacked from top to bottom. So, Antonio Brown used to be one of my favorite players. Now he's one of my least favorite players. I think he's usurped Odell Beckham Jr. as probably one of the most hated players in the entire league. And yeah, the Steelers never would have traded AB to the Patriots. It's come out that the Patriots offered the Steelers a first-round draft pick for AB, and they refused. And ended up trading AB to the Raiders for a third and a fifth, which is way less draft capital than a first-round pick. Even a Patriots first-round pick, which is, you know, likely to be at the end of the first round. So let's not continue to dwell on the whole negative Antonio Brown thing. Let's just hope and pray that karma comes back to bite the Patriots in the butt down the line. Now, another story I wanted to talk about from Week 1 is Adam Vinatieri. Obviously, he had a bit of a rough week, missing 2 field goals and an extra point. It was the first time in his career that ever happened. And, you know, a lot of people are thinking that maybe he's over the hill or maybe he should retire, or, you know, even the Colts, Adam Vinatieri himself even said that he thinks the Colts should cut him after such a poor performance. And I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. Now, don't get me wrong. If he has another bad week in Week 2, I think that the appropriate thing for Vinatieri to do would be to just gracefully bow out and retire from the sport. You know, he's already the all-time NFL leading point scorer, shoe-in for a Hall of Fame, shoe-in as a kicker, you know. So he's had such an impressive career. I wouldn't want him to go out like this after Week 1. But, you know, if he has another bad week next week, I just fear that the Colts are too classy of an organization to cut him. And, you know, if you don't got it anymore, you don't want to be the reason why the team continues to lose games, because he was the reason why they lost in Week 1 there. So, you know, I'd like to see Adam Vinatieri come back another week here, see if he can turn it around. And if he can't, I think the right thing for him to do would be to retire because, as I said, I think the Colts are a really classy organization. Think about all the money that they let Luck keep that they could have gone after him for. Think about the very, very fair contract that they signed Jacoby Brissett to that they were not at all obligated to do. They could have paid Jacoby Brissett pennies this year, and instead they signed him to a 2-year, $30 million, $20 million guaranteed contract. That was a very classy move by the Colts, and Adam Vinatieri being such a long-standing member of the team and such a key guy in the locker room and everything. I just don't think that the Colts, I think he could miss 20 field goals and the Colts wouldn't cut him. So I'd like to see, Vinatieri try to shake it off, see if he can come back next week. I love the guy, so, I'm really hoping that he can do it. But if he can't, it might be time for Adam Vinatieri to hang up those cleats once and for all. Now, a couple of other big storylines from week 1 that I wanted to talk about are just the AFC South. Like, the AFC South is so dang good. It's just ridiculous. I think Houston is the team to beat in the AFC, even though they lost there in week 1. I mean, they were playing in New Orleans, which is a very, very difficult place to go play and win. And, the only people that can beat New Orleans in New Orleans are the referees. And they almost did it again here in week 1, screwing the way that they screwed the Saints over before halftime with the bad clock management by the referees. That almost cost the Saints the game because they missed that field goal right before half. If the referees hadn't screwed up the timing there, then, it's likely that they would have been able to get closer. The Saints, that is, would have been able to get closer and would have been able to make that field goal before halftime, which would have given them a nice little bit of extra cushion, going down the stretch in the fourth quarter there. And yeah, besides the Texans, though, in the AFC South, I mean, the Jaguars with that rookie quarterback, Gardner Minshew, like he looked good. I think he was an upgrade on Nick Foles, from how he played. And that defense is still intact. They obviously didn't have the best showing, but that was against Kansas City, who is, just an offensive juggernaut in the NFL. I don't think anybody expected Jacksonville to have, a phenomenal showing on defense. But I think that going forward, we're going to see some great performances out of Jacksonville defensively. Leonard Fournette looked renewed and looked as good as he ever has. I think Jacksonville is a for-real team. And then the Colts, playing against the Chargers this past week, Chargers are one of the best teams in the AFC, and the Colts literally only lost because Adam Vinatieri missed 2 field goals and an extra point. That game went to overtime, and Adam Vinatieri left 7 points on the field. So, without Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett there at quarterback, the Colts, they have a phenomenal offensive line. Marlon Mack ran his ass off. That was the best performance of his career. And that defense is amazing with Darius Leonard, commanding the center of it. And, the Colts are not a team to be trifled with. And then the Titans blew the freaking Browns out by 30 points, the Titans are a for-real team as well. So, there's 4 really formidable teams there in the AFC South. And I expected the AFC South to be a pretty good division, but besides the NFC North, I think they're the best division in all of football. Definitely the best division in the AFC. So, that's some interesting stuff to watch coming down the line to see how this division progresses. Like I said, I think the Colts and the Titans are probably the 2 most underrated teams in the NFL, the entire NFL. And I think that the Texans are the front runners in the AFC. They're just so well-rounded. Compared to the Chiefs, who I would say are maybe the second best team in the AFC. The Chiefs can't really play much defense. Their secondary is suspect. Mahomes didn't look as good in the second half of his game without Tyreek Hill in the lineup and, with his twisted ankle. Now, having said that, the Jacksonville defense is good, and the game script didn't really call for Mahomes to have to play really well in the second half of that game. So I understand, that might not be a fair sample to look at, Mahomes' second half play. But, I definitely am seeing a slight regression in Mahomes this year compared to last year where he had, one of the most historic seasons in NFL history at quarterback. So I don't think it's a hot take to say that he's going to regress from, one of the greatest seasons of all time. But, yeah, I'm thinking the AFC South is not a division to be overlooked. I think after Luck left, people were discounting that division a little bit, but man, they got 4 really, really good teams over there. All right. So now let's take a little retrospective look at sort of all the games from last week. I'm going to try to get through this pretty quick. Lions and Cardinals. So the Cardinals were only really able to come back in that game because of a blocked punt and really mismanaged coaching on the behalf of the Lions in the fourth quarter, which, go figure, the Lions shooting themselves in the foot. And then you have to think David Johnson is just an elite player. There's no denying that. And, he scored a key touchdown there in the fourth quarter, and that was just David Johnson being David Johnson. So I'm still thinking that the Cardinals are one of the worst teams in the league. I'm not giving them much of a chance to be good this year. People that thought the Cardinals were going to be really good this year, I think that the first 3 quarters of that game against the Lions was indicative of how the Cardinals are going to be this season. All right, Cowboys and Giants. I think the Cowboys are a top 2 team in the NFC right now, them along with the Vikings. And man, their offense looked dynamic under rookie offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. Now, I've always been a big Kellen Moore fan. I loved him from his college career as an undersized quarterback. He had the NCAA record for most wins by a quarterback in NCAA history, and he can never really make it in the NFL just because he was so undersized. But he stuck around on a lot of rosters, as a practice squad quarterback or a third string quarterback, because he's just such a cerebral guy. And we really saw his intelligence come through in that game. That offense of the Cowboys looked dynamic. They looked creative. Dak Prescott looked so accurate. Hasn't been a guy who's known for his accuracy, but man, he was accurate all game long. Amari Cooper, we already know about. Michael Gallup coming into the second year looked phenomenal. Randall Cobb fit right into that offense, looking great. Jason Witten took a year off of football, came back. He's still great. And then I think the strength of the team on the Cowboys is really the defense, which is, it's the same thing as the Vikings. They're stacked on offense and, have a lot of offensive potential, but the defense is really the strength of the team. Like in the center of the Cowboys defense, you've got Sean Lee, Leighton Vander Esch. That's a dual linebacker core that kind of reminds me of how the Panthers used to be a few years ago with Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis, where these guys can just fly sideline to sideline, make crazy tackles. And then obviously the defensive front with DeMarcus Lawrence up there. And then, the back with Byron Jones, the secondary, I should say, with Byron Jones. I mean, the Cowboys are just stacked up and down, and I think they're definitely one of the teams to beat this year. Colts and Chargers. So as I was saying earlier, I think the Colts are maybe the most underrated team in the NFL. They should have beat the Chargers, and the Chargers are, without a doubt, one of the best teams in the league. If it wasn't for some really sloppy tackling on behalf of the Colts against Austin Eckler, where, they just let him catch a pass and, oh my God, just sloppy tackling out of the Colts cost them. And Adam Vinatieri's leg, obviously missing the kicks, really cost them in that one. But Jacoby looked good. Their defense looked good outside of the missed tackles. Their O-line was really good. Marlon Mack ran wild. I don't expect that out of him every week, but man, if they can get half that production out of Mack on a regular basis, the Colts might be a playoff contender in the AFC. And Kansas City and Jacksonville. About Jacksonville, I think Minshew, this rookie quarterback, he won the Johnny Unitas award for best quarterback, who also exhibits real leadership qualities off the field in the NCAA last year. And he looked like an upgrade from Nick Foles, to be honest. I think we kind of know what Nick Foles' ceiling is. as a player. We've seen the best Nick Foles that we can ever see, on that Philly playoff run or in that season when he threw 27 touchdowns and 2 picks. But Minshew, he might be the future quarterback for the Jaguars. And, obviously Foles is gone probably for the season, at least for a good while. So it's going to be interesting to watch this Minshew kid play and see if he can finally give the Jaguars the stability that they crave at quarterback. So Jets and Bills, let's just talk about this one quickly. I mean, both defenses looked really, really good in that game. But, I mean, the Jets only scored 6 points off of 4 turnovers in the first half. That's just not going to cut it on offense. And the Bills really didn't get their offense going until C.J. Mosley went down, who is, the middle linebacker, centerpiece, play caller of the Jets defense. So, I really don't have much faith in either of those offenses. It was really encouraging to see what happened with, the production that Jamison Crowder put out there, and Lev Bell looked good after taking, the year off for the Jets. So I'm not counting either of these teams out yet, but they need to show me a lot more at offense before I consider them, sleepers in the AFC again. Like I was saying last week. Last week I was saying I think one of these two teams could emerge as a sleeper in the AFC. But until we see a little bit better offensive production out of at least one of these teams, I'm going to slow my roll on that bold prediction. Ravens and the Dolphins. Obviously, as a Dolphins fan, I was not watching that game. I'm not going to be watching the Dolphins at all this year because I'm expecting a lot of that. We're definitely the worst team in the league. So it's really hard to judge the Ravens based off of that performance. Are they the best team in the NFL, or are they just a very good team that was playing against by far the worst team in the NFL? It's going to be really interesting to see the Ravens when they actually have to play against some better teams, see how that offense looks. I think that was probably the best stat line you're ever going to see from Lamar Jackson from a passing standpoint. He only had 6 rushing yards. It's going to be interesting to see how the Ravens go moving forward. And, the Steelers looked horrible. And the Browns obviously had a really bad week as well. So the Ravens are clearly the front runner in that division. And, one of the better teams in the AFC. All right, Packers and Bears. So that was a game where it was, a lot of people are obviously, think of the Packers as an offensive team. But their defense carried them in that one. And, we obviously know the Bears have the best defense in the entire league, so it wasn't really surprising how good the Bears defense looked. But I think the big story was just how bad Rodgers and Trubisky both looked. And the fact that neither of them played in the preseason at all, that was a storyline that a lot of people have been talking about, that, some of these guys, like Jared Goff, Trubisky, Rodgers that didn't play in the preseason might start a little slow in the regular season because they haven't had to feel that real game speed or actually have to, manage a play clock and get their audibles in and schemes adjusted on the fly, all while trying to get the ball snapped, I should say, before the play clock runs out. So it's going to be interesting to see how these teams look going forward. The Packers have a huge test coming up this weekend against the Vikings, who I think, along with the Cowboys, are the 2 best teams in the entire league. Bears have a bit of an easier matchup, so it's going to be interesting to see if Trubisky and this Matt Nagy offense that's just stacked with playmakers can actually start to get the ball rolling a little bit on offense. They were a top 12 offense last year. And, they're so stacked with playmakers. I think that they can get there again this year. But, you have to give the Packers credit. They are really good on defense. Broncos and the Raiders. So the Raiders looked really good on offense. They looked really, really crisp. I'll give it to them. Josh Jacobs was amazing. Tyrell Williams outperformed expectations greatly. I thought Tyrell Williams might be able to have a game like that, with Antonio Brown constantly drawing double coverage, but no AB there. Tyrell Williams has to be the number one wide receiver, and he did the damn thing. You have to applaud him, and I think the Raiders' offense might be good this year. Excuse me. It is worth noting though that the Broncos are just a bad team now. Like a couple of years ago, they were obviously really good, and they have. You think of them as having an elite defense, but really they have an elite pass rushing defense. And that doesn't really help you if you don't have an offense that can put up a decent amount of points, right? Because you want to be able to turn your pass rushers loose. Like you want to be able to turn Chubb and Miller loose. But if your offense can't put up points, then the other team can just run the ball against you, and then your pass rush, like Von Miller and Chubb, are not very useful like on run defense. They're only really useful if you can get them in favorable passing situations where they can pin their ears back and just rush the quarterback. And Denver just they're just not well built right now. Like, I think that they should probably look into trading away Miller and trading away Chubb and trying to just rebuild this team from the ground up. And they do have a good, strong running game, potentially, but I just think that the Broncos are not very well built anymore, and they kind of need to blow this thing up. Texans and Saints, my goodness. I mean, it's only week 1 right now, but that could very well end up being the game of the season. That was such a phenomenally entertaining game. Both teams are so well-rounded, phenomenal at basically every single phase of the game. That might be a Super Bowl preview, not to overstate it, but I think Houston is the best team in the AFC. So by virtue of that, I probably got them going to the Super Bowl right now from the AFC side. And then the Saints are obviously always a contender. They've gone to the NFC Championship game back-to-back years, and they really, or no, not back-to-back years. 2 years ago, they lost in the round before the conference round due to the Minneapolis Miracle, and then last year they got screwed over by the refs. And they almost got screwed over by the refs in week 1 here. So the refs are the Saints' biggest adversaries. But the Saints are definitely a threat in the NFC. Particularly, the Falcons looked pretty flat against a really, really good Vikings team. But they did look flat, and Panthers looked really flat. Buccaneers looked terrible. So, the Saints are primed in a good position to at least make the playoffs and get at least one home game in the playoffs. And the Saints at home are a nightmare for anybody. I consider a very narrow loss by the Texans to be a bit of a win when you have to go to New Orleans and play against the Saints. Bengals and Seahawks. Zach Taylor had the best head coaching debut of any of the head coaches that were making their debut this weekend. Even though he lost, just like the Texans lost, I think that their stock improves a lot in that loss. Going into Seattle, it's like going into New Orleans. It's an extremely difficult place to win on the road. And, I still think the Seahawks are a really good football team. I don't think that the Bengals did well in that game because the Seahawks are bad. I think the Bengals offense is for real. I think Zach Taylor's a legit offensive coach. They've got plenty of weapons there in Cincinnati, which is crazy because it's like the same guys that they had last year. But, when you get rid of Marvin Lewis, who's just, the most uninspired coach in the game, and you bring in a young guy with, a great offensive pedigree, you see what the Bengals can do with some of those playmakers. And that was without A.J. Green on the field, and that's with Joe Mixon, getting hurt, getting knocked out of the game, and, Mixon didn't do anything before. So those are basically what probably most people considered the top 2 players on that Bengals offense were out of the game, and the Bengals looked that good still. I think that after how terrible the Steelers looked this past weekend, I think the Steelers are the 4th best team in that division. Bengals have passed them to now being the 3rd, maybe even 2nd best, because, dude, the Browns look terrible too. Falcons and Vikings. Now, obviously, the Vikings absolutely dominated the Falcons. Now, if you're a Falcons fan, it's not time to press the panic button yet. It is overreaction season right now, right after week 1. But don't press the panic button yet. The Vikings are so good against opposing quarterbacks, especially at home. Last season, no opposing quarterback in fantasy football scored more than 12 fantasy points against the Vikings. And the Vikings hosted Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees and a bunch of other great quarterbacks last year. So a poor performance from Matt Ryan. I wouldn't put too much stock into it. I think the amazing thing is that the Vikings won that game, and dominated that game. They're up 28-zip going into the fourth quarter, and then if it weren't for some garbage time points from the Falcons, the Falcons got absolutely shut out in that game. But yeah, the Vikings won, and Kirk Cousins only threw 10 passes. Kirk said he hasn't thrown so few passes in a game since he was in Pop Warner. That's probably true. But if they can run the ball with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison looked phenomenal. I mean, the Vikings are a very, very scary team to play. And they get to travel to Green Bay this week, so it's really, really exciting. We get to see a very formidable test with how good Green Bay's defense looked, and then Green Bay having home field advantage. This is going to be a very, very good game. It's a game I'm probably most looking forward to this upcoming week. Now, Browns and Titans. Even though it's overreaction season, I'm going to try to not overreact on the Browns just yet. They just simply have too much talent on both sides of the football to write them off this early. And I think it's worth noting that I think that the safety that the Browns gave up right before halftime to my dog, Cam Wake, I think him and Tannehill split a U-Haul going out to Tennessee. And my boy Cam Wake just smashed Baker when they got that safety right before halftime. And I heard somebody pointing this out. I can't remember who, but if you watch that playback, which I did after I heard this, when Baker hits the ground, he gets driven into the ground head first. And if you watch his arm that's visible, I believe it was his left arm that was visible, you see it actually drop limp for just a split second. I think Baker might have gotten literally knocked out there. I think he was severely concussed, because if you watch the first half of that game, it was a close game, very close score at halftime. But in that second half, Baker just made horrible decisions. He was less accurate. The Titans really just ran away with it. And, it's worth noting, like I was saying, I think the AFC South is the most underrated division in football. The Titans are a really, really good football team. They have a phenomenal defense. And then, they have one of the just ultimate battering rams of running backs in the league, and Derrick Henry, who can just smash the ball down your throat, and then also has breakaway speed. An extremely strong defense and a battering ram of a running back is a phenomenal recipe to win football games. You can really control the clock and smash the other team around. So, I think the Titans are a real dark horse in the NFL this year. Rams and Panthers. So this is one where I'm definitely trying to overreact. Cam Newton, if you got him in fantasy football, sell his ass off, drop him, just flat out drop him. I'm dropping him this week. I'm going to pick up like frickin' Andy Dalton or somebody. Like, I don't care. It was the first time in Newton's career that he had negative rushing yards. And, if he has negative rushing yards in week one because he's a little bit, banged up with the foot and stuff, he's going to play week in and week out. How is he ever going to get healthy? How is he ever going to get healthy and be able to actually run the football, which is how he's effective in fantasy formats? If you're relying on Newton for his arm, just get rid of him. You're better off getting Derek Carr, for real. And, having said all that, how terrible, utterly horrendous the Panthers were, the Rams only narrowly squeaked out of there with a victory. So I'm sticking to my guns on my theory that the Rams are going to have a Super Bowl hangover this year. They're not going to make the playoffs. I don't think they're a playoff team this year. And, only time will tell. We have to see them play an actual decent team before we can say that for sure. But I'm selling the Rams big time right now. I'm getting rid of Cam Newton. The only player worth having on that team is Christian McCaffrey. Redskins and Eagles. So there was a game, the first half of that game, that's the best the Redskins are going to look all year. That's the best that they can do. And that was really, the poor tackling on the Eagles on Vernon Davis for one of those touchdowns. I really just don't think that you're ever going to see anything better than that out of the Redskins. They're definitely one of the worst teams in the league. That second half collapse by them was just abysmal. They can't really play defense. The Eagles just got off to a slow start, which in week one, that can definitely happen. I'm interested to see maybe Dwayne Haskins come in a little bit down the line for the Redskins, just to get an idea if he actually has the potential to be an NFL caliber quarterback. Because I think with Case Keenum, it's kind of like Nick Foles. You know what you got with him. He's an adequate quarterback. He can do okay for you. But, if you don't have a really strong running game, which they don't, Darius Geis looked terrible. And you don't have a really strong defense, which they don't, their defense looked terrible. Case Keenum's just not the guy. He's a real game manager. He was good on the Vikings a couple of years ago when they could, run the ball really well and had a phenomenal defense. But, he's not the guy he's not the guy that's going to go out there and sling the ball and win you games. Now on the Eagles side, they just had a slow start. I'm in on the Eagles right now. I'm in on them big time. I think that they're a potential playoff team. Carson Wentz looked great in the second half. They're just stacked with playmakers. Miles Sanders, if you look at his stat line, wasn't very good. But if you were watching the game and watching Sanders play, he looked really good. He looked really, really good as a football player. Now, yeah, if you're looking at it from a fantasy perspective and you're just staring at the bottom line, the stat line, you're not gonna think that. But you know what? If you're out there and if you're playing fantasy football, you could probably buy Miles Sanders for real cheap. I would try to make a trade for him. So Steelers and Patriots. I'm a absolute Patriots hater, as I've stated many times. But off the top of the show, like I stated, I think this is the best Patriots team they've had since that 16-0 season, and that was without Antonio Brown in the lineup. So, I'm calling Houston the team to beat in the AFC. It's probably the Patriots, to be honest, over Houston. But I just hate the Patriots so much. I'm not going to give them that kind of credit. You know what? Also, the Steelers were freaking terrible, man. I think the Steelers are poised to have a horrible, horrible year. They're going to have to start to rebuild next year. Roethlisberger just looks worse and worse every year, I feel like. And without AB to lean on, that's really going to show this year. Juju's a great player and a great wide receiver, but he's not matchup proof. You know what I mean? If you have a really good corner, or you just double team them, you can take Juju out of the game. You can't take AB out of the game. And when you do try to, and if you do really, really try to take AB out of the game, then Juju and James Conner are going to crush you. But taking AB out of that lineup, the Steelers just don't have it. Their defense looked really bad. I think they're going to finish last in the division. After seeing how good the Bengals looked, I think they're going to finish last in the division. That's my hot take on the Steelers. All right. Now let's look into some of my must-watch games for Week 2. I got 4 of them this week. Number 1 game, must-watch game, Packers versus Vikings, especially because the Vikings are going to Green Bay. I think this is going to really show if I'm correct or not about the Vikings being a team to beat. Even if they lose this game, if it's really close and competitive, their stock will stay more or less the same to me, because it's really hard to go and win in Green Bay. And, that Green Bay team is phenomenal. It's going to be very interesting to see if that Green Bay offense can get anything going against that Vikings D after how bad their offense looked last week. Aaron Rodgers looked lost. Their one touchdown drive was, one really nice big play where Aaron made a nice read and a great throw deep down the field. And then he just sort of lobbed one up to Jimmy Graham for the touchdown. So, you didn't really see anything else that was really promising in the Green Bay offense. So it's going to be interesting to see how he looks and the Green Bay looks this week against the Vikings D. I, definitely am not a believer in Matt LaFleur, the new head coach for the Packers. I haven't been a believer in him. He was a bad coordinator last year. Let's call it what it was. He was a bad offensive coordinator last year for the Titans, one of the worst offenses in the league, and he somehow got a head coaching job. So I'm not buying in on the Packers just yet. But as long as Rodgers is there, and that defense is really good now in Green Bay, so they're still a threat. But I'm not sure if I'm buying them as a Super Bowl threat like I am with the Vikings. So that's going to be an interesting matchup to see if the Vikings can live up to the hype that I've put on them, or if the Packers can prove that it was just a slow start to week one because Rodgers didn't play any preseason snaps, and the Bears defense is just that much better than everybody, which I think the Bears defense is the best defense in the NFL, but man, the Vikings aren't too far back. Now, my next two matchups that I like are just matchups of the AFC South. Like I was saying earlier, I think the AFC South, besides the NFC North, best division in football. And, it might even be better than the NFC North. They're definitely the best division in the AFC, and we're seeing two matchups this week where the four AFC South teams are all playing each other. So we've got the Colts at the Titans, which, the Titans really outperformed expectations. And, so did the Colts with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. They only very narrowly lost to the LA Chargers, one of the best teams in the AFC. And the Titans just blew the doors off of the Browns, who have now lost, I think, 15. I believe it's 15, or lost or had a draw. Haven't had a win in 15 consecutive season openers. So, same old Browns, huh? And the other game is the Jaguars at the Texans. I suspect that the Texans are the best team in the AFC. But, the Jaguars are no joke, and I'm interested to see if this Minshew kid at quarterback, how he plays, getting to prepare as the starter, because he looked good against the Chiefs. Chiefs' defense is not the Texans' defense, but he looked good coming in relief of Big Dick Nick there. So it's gonna be interesting to see if he can get anything going, how Fournette looks, because, Kamara was just running all over that Texans D in the second half, but that's Alvin Kamara. But this is Leonard Fournette, so, maybe he can get that done as well. I'm just interested to see. I just don't know if what the Jaguars' identity is exactly, what their ceiling is exactly. I think that they just had a bad week last week against the Chiefs. I think they're a lot better than they showed. And, they have another really tough test this week against the Texans. Very, very tough opening of the season for the Jaguars. Kind of feel bad for them. But, it's kind of nice to get some of these tests out of the way early and, be able to rise to the occasion against some weaker teams down the line. My final game of the week for week 2 is the Eagles at the Falcons. The Falcons obviously had a really poor showing against the Vikings, but I think they're a lot better than that. And, they get to play at home in prime time against the Eagles. I think their defense is much better than they're probably being given credit for after week 1 there versus the Vikings. And their offense is just stacked, except for at running back, man. Devontae Freeman looks over the hill. And they just got nobody. Ito Smith I don't think is the answer to be their second guy. So they need to figure something out at running back. That's really the only weak point of the Falcons. And I got the Saints probably winning that division now. I had the Falcons before week 1. After seeing that running game and the way that they got blown out there in week 1, though, I'm lowering the Falcons. And I had the Eagles, being a borderline playoff team. And, after seeing how they came back and, seeing Deshaun Jackson, being so dynamic, and they've got so many other playmakers. Like, they're just stacked with playmakers in Philadelphia. And I really admire how they're not afraid to be overstacked with playmakers. Like, they drafted Dallas Goedert as a second-round pick when they already had Zach Ertz. They go out and they trade for Jordan Howard, and then they draft Miles Sanders. They're not afraid to be stacked 2, 3 skilled positions deep all over the place. And they can really afford to do that because their O-line is set. So they don't need to worry about that. Their quarterback's set. Their defensive front is phenomenal. So they have some solid backbones that they can lean on their team. And they've just been able to just sort of stack playmakers. So, I think the Cowboys are the team to beat in that division. So I don't like the Eagles to do anything more than wild card this year. But, I think that they might be able to pull that out. And this week 2 matchup against the Falcons is going to be really telling to see which one of these teams can be a wild card. Because as I said, I think the Saints are poised to win their division. I think the Cowboys are poised to win the Eagles division. So I think that, it's only week 2, but a loss here in a super competitive NFC, especially for the Falcons to start 0-2 would be really, really hard for them to come back. I know that there might be some degenerates out there looking for some gambling advice, so here it is. And all these bets are based off of Bodog's betting lines and point spreads and all that good stuff. So Denver is a 2-point dog to Chicago. Only a 2-point dog. Now they are in Denver, but and it is worth noting that Vic Fangio, new head coach of the Denver Broncos, is the former DC from Chicago. So he might have some insight into, some of Trubisky's weaknesses or some other offensive weaknesses that the Bears might have, because the Bears are very similar this year as they to what they were last year. Obviously, David Montgomery is added in the mix, but I digress. They're very similar to the way that they were last year offensively. So Vic Fangio might have some insight into how to defeat them. But, I think the Broncos looked horrible, just horrendous against the Raiders last night. Like, the Raiders looked like they had a freaking, a prime Green Bay Packers offense against that fucking Broncos D. So that Broncos offense just looked terrible. Like, the Raiders defense is not a great defense at all, and the Broncos couldn't do jack shit against the Raiders last night. So I like Chicago. I love Chicago in this one, I should say. They're only 2-point favorites, so you can take them with the spread. That's a phenomenal bet. If you want to just take them straight up, you're not giving up that much money, compared to a 2-point spread. So hammer the Bears against the Broncos. I love that bet. And then we have Cincinnati at home versus San Francisco, and they're only 1.5-point favorites. And Cincinnati looked phenomenal against the Seahawks, and I don't think it was because the Seahawks were bad. I think it's because Zach Taylor is an imaginative offensive coach, and they actually have playmakers over there in Cincinnati. John Ross being a game breaker, Tyler Boyd. They don't even have AJ Green, and Joe Mixon, if he plays, is going to be limited in the way he plays. But I still think that Cincinnati is just going to crap on San Francisco, San Francisco is such a bad team. They looked terrible against the Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers are just the scum of the earth defensively, and San Francisco couldn't do anything to them. So 1.5 points, that's it. That's all. They are favorited. I love Cincinnati, especially the fact that they're at home. I think that they're gonna smash the Niners. And same thing with the Bears bet. It's only 1.5 points as favorites, so you can just go money line even if you don't want to give up that 1.5. If you're nervous about giving up that 1.5, you can go money line, and you're not getting that much worse of betting odds. Now, another bet that I like is just a simple over/under bet. I love the under in Green Bay versus Minnesota. The over/under is set at 44.5 points. And we saw how good that Packers D looked. We saw how good that Vikings D looked in week 1. Against some pretty good offenses, particularly Atlanta. Very, very good offense. I just don't see any way that this game gets to 44.5 points. This is going to be a 17-20 game at best, I think, scoring wise, which equals 37 points, well under the 44.5. I think you should hammer the under on that one. Just hammer it. Big bet on that. I love that bet. I haven't been gambling too much the past couple of years because I just realized sports gambling is just too damn volatile. You could have the best bet and, something unexpected can happen, like somebody can slip on a frickin' banana peel, like crazy stuff can happen in pro sports. So I just don't like to gamble anymore. But looking at odds and to try to make this segment of the video, when I saw 44.5 points for that game being the over/under, man, like that makes me want to get back into gambling. I want to put a couple $100 on that. Like that seems like gimme easy money. And here's the last bet that I have for week 2. It's the Saints versus the Rams. Saints are 3-point favorites. Like I said, I'm all out on the Rams this year. I think they're poised to have a Super Bowl hangover. I didn't think they looked good like in week 1 because I didn't think the Panthers were were looking very good at all. And the Rams only narrowly got away with the victory in that one. I'm not usually a guy who buys revenge game narratives, but I think Sean Payton is the kind of guy where you want to buy the revenge game narrative. And after what happened in the NFC Championship game last season, I think the Saints are going to come in here looking to put the wood to the Rams, and I expect them to do it. The Saints looked really good last night in the Monday Nighter, and I think that they're going to just smash the Rams. They're 3-point favorites. I definitely love them to win straight up money line. 3 points. I would definitely be interested in that as well. But really, it's a money line bet. I just don't think there's any way that the Saints don't win this game. All right, now let's talk a little suicide picks for week 2. Hopefully you got through week 1 of your Survivor suicide pool. I did just by the skin of my teeth because I took the Seahawks, who are my number 1 team, to win in week 1. And, they barely got out of there. I almost lost in week 1, and I lost in week 1 in my suicide pool last year because I had the Saints to beat the Buccaneers in week 1 last season. And, of course, the Saints lose that game somehow and then go on to win 11 straight after that, ruining my suicide pool for this entire season. And, the Bengals almost spoiled my party this year. They almost beat the Seahawks, but the Seahawks luckily were able to pull it out in the end. So I live to see another week. Now, my number 1 suicide pick of the week, this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of the season, I think, and it's you just got to pick whoever's playing the Dolphins, where the Dolphins are clearly tanking. Clearly, like they're not even trying to pretend that they're not tanking. Players want to get traded away, which I'm saying, trade them all. We only have really like Minka Fitzpatrick and Xavier Howard are the only players really worth keeping on the entire roster right now. So if they want to go, trade their asses. Let's get a little bit of more draft capital for them. But whoever's playing the Dolphins, and especially the Patriots playing the Dolphins. Patriots are one of the best teams in the league. They'll have AB this week. Not that it even matters. They could win by 50 without AB. I think they're like 17.5-point favorites. Just ridiculous, but they'll probably cover. I got the Patriots as the number 1 suicide pick of the week. The number 2 suicide pick of the week, I got the Ravens to beat the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals are just an abysmally terrible team. They were able to make the comeback against the Lions, but that was really because of a blocked punt, bad coaching on the Lions' part, and David Johnson just being an absolute freak. The Cardinals did absolutely nothing for the first 3 quarters of that game, and I think that's sort of their identity this year. They're not going to be very good at all. Meanwhile, the Ravens obviously looked like world beaters, but that was against the Dolphins, who were the worst team in the league. So it's hard to know exactly where the Ravens stand, but for now, I think it's pretty obvious that they're going to absolutely shit on the lesser teams in the league, which is what the Cardinals are. Now, my third top pick of the week is the Cowboys to beat the Redskins. Like I was saying earlier, I think the Redskins are, just one of the worst teams in the league. It's just the way it is. Nothing against them, but They don't really have much going for them. And I think the Cowboys are just one of the best teams in the league. Their offense looked sensational last week. And like I was saying, the offense isn't even necessarily the strength of the team. Like, their defense is phenomenal. I don't see Case Keenum and Vernon Davis and Chris Thompson being able to do very much against this Cowboys defense. And also that Redskins defense looks so bad in the second half against Philadelphia. And I think the Cowboys offense is similarly dynamic, maybe not quite as dynamic in the passing game, but definitely, with Ezekiel Elliott there, one of the premier running backs in the league. I think it's debatable that the Cowboys are probably better than the Eagles offensively. So I got the Cowboys to beat the Redskins pretty easily. And my fourth and final suicide pick of the week is the Chiefs over the Raiders. This one I feel the least confident about, but that's relative to the other three picks. I still would feel very confident in the Chiefs to beat the Raiders. The Raiders don't have many pieces on defense, and it doesn't even matter if you have pieces on defense like Jacksonville did. Like, you saw how much good that did them against a dynamic Kansas City offense. Obviously, Kansas is missing Tyreek Hill, but I think Mecole Hardman, offers a similar upside to Hill. Obviously, nobody's as fast and dynamic as Hill, but Mecole Hardman is a very serviceable player there. LaShawn McCoy looked really dynamic, very efficient in that game. So, the Raiders offense did look good, and the Chiefs defense is not so good. But, are the Raiders going to be able to beat the Chiefs? I just don't see that happening. All right, now let's get into the bread and butter, the part that everybody is probably most excited for, the fantasy football talk. And, like always, after week one, there's a ton of breakout players that, are out there on the waiver wire that people just didn't see coming. And, then there's also some breakout players that aren't going to have the kind of sustainable output that they had in week one, but people are going to be frothing at the mouth to get. Example of that is Marquise Brown. I'll get into why he is a terrible pickup later, even though most people are probably looking at him as the number one pickup of the week. But my number one pickup of the week is TJ Hawkinson from the Detroit Lions, rookie tight end. Everybody says it, and it's usually very true. Rookie tight ends are not very good in fantasy football, or in football in general, right? Tight end is a position that it's a bit of an acquired taste. It takes a little bit of time to get your legs under you as a tight end. But man, Hawkinson came out. He led the Lions in targets, tied at least with Kenny Golladay, 9 targets. And he obviously had an insane stat line. And I think if you basically don't have, Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, Evan Ingram, you should definitely go out and get Hawkinson, especially because a lot of people aren't going to prioritize him as their top waiver pick. So if you prioritize him as your top waiver pick, you'll likely get him. And, if week one was an indicator at all, which I think it is going to be, Matt Stafford targeted him so much. Matt Stafford obviously likes him, and Stafford loves the underneath guys. That's why Amendola had such a big stat line as well. Hawkinson can be a league winner. To get that upper tight end level of production consistently at a position where, the floor for most guys is like, extremely low. Like, if you don't have one of these top guys, you're basically going in with a lottery ticket every week, hoping that your guy can score a touchdown. Now, obviously, like Austin Hooper had a good week, but somebody like O.J. Howard or even Hunter Henry, which I think Hunter Henry will have better weeks going forward, but O.J. Howard looked really bad. Jameis Winston doesn't like to target him for some reason. He prefers to target Cameron Brate. So, it's not quite time to sell O.J. Howard just yet, but I think even if you have Howard as your top guy, you should be targeting Hawkinson, and because, he could be a league winner. Having that kind of production at tight end is league winning potential. Yeah. Besides Hawkinson, the only other tight end that's really worth going out there and getting, I think, is probably Austin Hooper if he's available, but he's likely not available on the waiver wire. So let's get into quarterbacks. Now, if you have Cam Newton, like I said, I'm dropping him right now because his rushing upside has evaporated, in my opinion, for this season. So if you have Cam Newton, you have him as a throwing quarterback. And I just don't think that he's going to be able to produce even top 10 numbers if you're relying on him for his arm. So if you have got Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, who's got a rough matchup this week, Ben Roethlisberger, who I think is, just a guy that's not worth owning in fantasy football at this point, then here I've got some guys that you should be targeting here for week 2. The first guy I'm going to talk about is Andy Dalton. Now, he had a huge week 1, and you can't expect that type of production from him necessarily week in and week out, but I think you can expect a good amount of production from him going forward in this Zach Taylor offense, which is, dynamic, and they understand how to use playmakers. It seems like, John Ross is going to be taking over, that Brandon Cooks type of a role in that offense, and Tyler Boyd is a dynamic playmaker himself, and they don't even have AJ Green back yet. So, but even without AJ Green there, and even if Mixon doesn't play in week 2, they have a really favorable matchup here against San Francisco. So if you're looking for a 1-week streamer that has potential to have some staying power on your team throughout the season, Andy Dalton is the guy. Now, my second pick for a quarterback off the waiver wire this week is Josh Allen. I mean, he has tremendous rushing upside, and they're playing the Giants this week. And like I was saying earlier, Dak Prescott never looked more accurate. That Dallas Cowboys offense looked so damn good. And I'm crediting Kellen Moore's offensive coordinator for the Cowboys for how good the offense of the Cowboys looked. But it's possible that, it's the Giants' defense that's just abysmal and made, Dak Prescott look like a prime Aaron Rodgers out there. So I think Josh Allen's a guy worth going after for his rushing upside and the fact that he's just got a favorable matchup this week. And he's another guy who, if he can get it going, he might have some staying power. He might be the new Cam Newton type of a player with a high rushing upside at the quarterback position. And the final quarterback that I'm looking at potentially on the waiver wire this week is Derek Carr. He looked phenomenal against the Broncos in week 1, and the Broncos, definitely I would say have a better defense than the Chiefs, even though I think the Broncos defense is probably pretty overrated at this point. They really have quality pass rushing, but they're a little bit softer everywhere else, which, as I was saying, pass rushing is not so good if you can't play with a lead, which the Broncos are never going to play with a lead. So I really like Carr this week. He's got a good matchup against the Chiefs. And it's not just a good matchup against the Chiefs because the Chiefs' defense isn't so great. It's also a great matchup against the Chiefs always. This is something worth thinking about, or this is a different way to think about it, is if you're playing a team that has so much scoring potential like the Chiefs do, then your offense, you're going to have to throw the ball a million times to try to keep up with them. And when you have a million pass attempts, you're just increasing, your quarterback's chances of being able to score points. So I like Derek Carr to be able to be a pretty good fantasy option this week because they're just going to have to throw the ball a ton to try to keep up with Kansas City. On top of that, Derek Carr looked good last night, and the Raiders' offense looked really good last night. And the Chiefs' defense isn't so good. So, bad defense for the Chiefs, good offense for the Chiefs, and good offense for the Raiders. I like Derek Carr this week. Now, looking at running backs, I don't think there's any real good home run options like there are, like TJ Hawkinson is at tight end, or like some of the wide receivers I'm going to talk about next. But there are a lot of good, very decent options out there at running back. The first guy I'm going to talk about is a guy that I was really high on and I actually drafted in one of my leagues, and that's Malcolm Brown. it seems pretty obvious that the Rams are committed to using a timeshare at offense to try to, limit Gurley's reps. So, they're probably going to try to preserve him, for their hopeful postseason run that I don't think they're going to have. But Malcolm Brown had more red zone touches than Gurley. So if you're a Gurley owner, you should go out there and get Brown purely, as a handcuff, but also because he's going to vulture a lot of Gurley's red zone touches. So, and then also on top of that, I think Malcolm Brown has standalone value, given the potential game scripts that they're facing. Now, another guy I like a lot is Gio Bernard. Gio's I've always had a soft spot for Gio. And, with Mixon out of the lineup, he's clearly, far and away the only option that they really have at running back there in Cincinnati. And Mixon has that ankle sprain. Even if he plays next week, that's almost better for Gio if you think about it, because if Mixon plays next week, it's the same thing like I was saying with Cam Newton. If Cam Newton couldn't rush in week 1 because he has a foot injury, well, he's going to play every week. How is he ever going to get healthy to be able to regain his rushing upside? And that's what I feel about Mixon if he plays this week. How are you ever going to heal your ankle if you're playing football every weekend? So I think Mixon's going to see some decline if he plays. I think it would be beneficial to Mixon to take a couple weeks off, and beneficial to the Bengals for Mixon to take a couple weeks off, really focus on healing that ankle now that we're at the start of the season, rather than play the next 15 games at 50%. Bernard also has standalone value in PPR formats because he's a great safety blanket for Andy Dalton, who, his other safety blankets are Tyler Eifert, who's injury prone, and he didn't really use that much, and CJ Uzomah, who, they're splitting reps at tight end. So those tight end running back targets, which tight end targets and running back targets correlate to one another, are going to be going to Gio Bernard regardless of the situation, like even if Mixon's playing. So Bernard has standalone value in PPR formats, and if Mixon isn't playing, he's got definite RB2 upside. Now the next running back I want to talk about is Ronald Jones. Now, he showed some promise there in week 1, and the reason why I like Ronald Jones is the fact that whoever's the starting running back in Bruce Arians' offense traditionally, if you look at history, has been a very solid fantasy football option. And Bruce Arians doesn't really like to do the running back by committee as much as, is really popular in modern football. So if you can get Ronald Jones, I mean, you're getting a guy who is going to be a workhorse. I think it seems pretty obvious after week 1 that Ronald Jones is poised to be the workhorse, and he's by far the most talented running back on that roster. I'm not saying that Ronald Jones is a really talented running back, and the fact is that the Bucs are going to have a lot of really negative game scripts and that's going to hurt Ronald Jones's production. But I mean, if you're getting a guy who is going to be the number 1 running back on a football team, and that football team isn't really going to try to do a running back by committee, and that guy's on the waiver wire, I mean, you just have to go and get him. He's going to have a good flex upside. He's going to have a consistent floor, and he's got a potential high ceiling as well. He is a dynamic athlete that, can make big plays, although I wouldn't hold my breath on it. You're really picking him up as a high floor type of a player. And the last running back I'm going to talk about is Raheem Mostert. I don't know how to say his last name. He's a running back for the San Francisco 49ers, and with Tevin Coleman going down, he's really primed to get a significant amount of touches, at least until Coleman comes back, which looks like it's going to be several weeks at least. The reason why he's poised for several touches, even though, Matt Breida is still going to be the number 1 guy there, is that Kyle Shanahan likes to do a running back by committee. He really likes to split the carries and the workload between 2 guys. Like, think about back when Kyle Shanahan was the OC for the Falcons. he really utilized, Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman were always both consistent fantasy football options because they both got consistent amounts of touches and, significant opportunities to make big plays. And because they're splitting touches so much, whenever one of them's coming in, they're usually fairly fresh in the game. And with Tevin Coleman being hurt for several weeks and, obviously McKinnon is on IR, you need to look at who's going to be that second running back for San Francisco. Now, obviously, San Francisco, not a very good team, and you don't want to necessarily be tying yourself to offenses that are on bad teams, with bad defenses, particularly at the running back position. But I think that he's a pretty safe high floor type of a guy. If you're looking for a high floor play to round out your running back roster or to just round out your bench and see what you got, I think Raheem is a guy worth going out and targeting. All right, now on to the position with the most breakout players from week 1, and that's wide receiver. Now, my number one guy, far and away, is Jamison Crowder. In PPR formats especially, Jamison Crowder is a must-own. If it's PPR format and he's on the waiver wire, I think he's a number one waiver priority, even above TJ Hawkinson. He had 17 targets. That was the most in the NFL by 3 or 4 targets. 4 targets, I believe. DeAndre Hopkins had 13 targets. That was the next most. He had 14 catches, so he had more receptions than anybody else even had targets in week 1. Sam Darnold loves that safety blanket underneath. He loves his slot guys. Adam Gase, if you've, as a Dolphins fan, I'm very aware of how Adam Gase likes to coach teams. Think back to the Dolphins when we had Jarvis Landry on the team, just how consistent of, especially in PPR formats, that guy was, just getting well over 100 receptions every year. Think back to last year, how good Albert Wilson looked until he got injured. Adam Gase loves to use these slot guys. Darnold loves to target these slot guys. Crowder in standard formats doesn't have the most upside because a lot of these catches are going to be, shorter underneath type of catches. But in PPR, his upside is through the roof. And even in standard formats, 17 targets, just 14 receptions, that offers an insanely high floor. He's a guy that if he's out on the waiver wire, you got to go after him. My second choice for wide receivers this week would be Mecole Hardman. Now, I'm not the biggest Mecole Hardman fan, but the fact is that if you're the number 2 wide receiving option on the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, who just slings the ball, then then you're somebody that I want on my fantasy team. Let's just put it like that. And the fact is that Hardman was sort of brought in to potentially replace Tyreek Hill as, the speedster dynamic athlete who can really, break the game open and offers a real deep threat, when Tyreek Hill was, potentially facing suspension for beating his child, which, is, no big deal. Just beat his kid a little bit. Hardman played 90% of the snaps in week 1. And, like I said, if you're the number 2 wide receiving option for Patrick Mahomes, I love it. Watkins is going to see a lot tougher coverage going forward after that huge breakout game in week 1. Travis Kelce always sees a ton of attention. So it just offers, a guy that can take the top end off of defense is just going to thrive. And obviously Mahomes throws the deep ball as good or better than anybody in the game. Hardman has serious boom potential until Hill gets back from injury, which is going to be several weeks at this point. So Mecole Hardman's a guy you got to be targeting. John Ross. He finally broke out. This guy is such a dynamic athlete with just ridiculous blazing speed. And, we wondered if he would ever break out. People like to shit on Andy Dalton and, Bengals are, a bit of a laughing stock. But, maybe the Bengals aren't as bad as people thought they were. Maybe Marvin Lewis, the most vanilla coach in football, was the reason why they weren't very good. And, with Zach Taylor there, he understands how to use dynamic offensive playmakers like you saw him do last year with St. Louis, with the LA Rams. I think Ross is going to offer that sort of Brandon Cooks type of upside. He could be a steal of a player this year. He could be an absolute league winner. The only reason why I don't have him higher on my list is because Crowder offers such a safer floor. Hardman offers the same boom until Hill comes back. And John Ross, once AJ Green comes back in the mix, he's going to fall to a third option. I'm not sure how much I trust Andy Dalton, even though he looked really good in week 1. Until I see Dalton do it a couple more times, I'm not sure if I'm going to trust him all the way. But John Ross led the team in targets. His upside is just absurd. Yeah, his upside is absurd. His athleticism is through the roof. I like him as a dynamic playmaker. Obviously, what he did in week 1, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that consistently. I wouldn't count on him being able to do that consistently. But if you want a player with a really, really high ceiling, he's that guy. Now, his floor isn't quite, where you would want it to be able to feel comfortable starting him week in and week out. But, it might be there. Time will tell. We need to see a larger sample size from the Bengals for a couple more weeks. But if we see a larger sample size from the Bengals and Ross is continuing to get these kinds of targets, then, he could be an absolute league winner. So you should be getting him now before, he has another big week and everybody wants to get him. You can sneak in and get John Ross right now while everybody's trying to get Marquise Brown, who is the most overrated pickup of the week. Now, the last guy I'm going to talk about here is Deshaun Jackson. Now, he led the team in targets. It's just insane that John Ross, and Deshaun Jackson are leading the team in targets when these are upside players that really take the top end off of defenses. They're not usually guys that get the most targets on the team. Particularly Deshaun Jackson with Zach Ertz and Alshon Jeffrey and Darren Sproles. Even they're guys that are just potential target monsters. Deshaun Jackson led the team in targets. To lead the team in targets when you've got all of those other playmakers that are demanding targets, and you have such a high ceiling player like Deshaun Jackson leading in targets, you just cannot ignore that. Carson Wentz can rip a deep ball as good as anybody. Defenses are going to be focused on these other positions. So I love Deshaun Jackson as a super high ceiling type of a play. And, I trust Carson Wentz a lot more than I trust Andy Dalton. So I think his floor is even safer than John Ross's. That stat line that Deshaun Jackson put up in week 1, don't expect that week in and week out, but he could put up that kind of a stat line on a regular basis throughout this season, and he could be another guy who could be a fantasy winner. So I'm going to talk about defenses that are worth streaming, and then we'll get into overhyped guys, and that'll be the end of fantasy talk. Defenses worth streaming. If you're a smart fantasy football player, you're streaming defenses. You didn't draft the Bears. You didn't draft the Jaguars, super high. Because defense is the position that is most matchup dependent of any position in fantasy football. Like I said, the Jaguars, phenomenal defense, but you don't want to play them against the Chiefs. You don't want to play anybody against the Chiefs. You don't want to play the Bears against the Chiefs. So you really want to pick defenses that have good matchups against terrible offenses, and you want to try to maximize your upside week in and week out. So the top defensive team for streaming this week is no surprise, and they likely aren't available, so I'm going to give a couple more examples after this, but the Patriots. And this is going to be a theme throughout the season. And this is a theme for defensive fantasy football in general. You want to find the worst offenses in the league, like the Dolphins, and you want to pick on them. You want to pick on them as often as you can. You want to play whatever defense is playing against the Dolphins. It doesn't matter. But the Patriots actually have a good defense. So if they're out there, that should be your priority to pick up. Now, second D, I'm going to say is the second most valuable defense this week is the Cowboys. Once again, they played the Giants last week, so it's likely that they aren't available on the waiver wire as well. But I'm just putting these out there just in case they are on your waiver wire. Like you need to pick up the Cowboys. They have a phenomenal defense, and they're playing against a really, really shitty Redskins team. So, you got to pick on these bad offenses. And the last team that I'm going to, the last team to pick up, to target, the last team defense to target on waivers this week is the Texans. They're playing against the Jaguars, who, have not been a very good offensive team for the last several years. They got a rookie quarterback in there, making his NFL starting debut. And like I said, I think Minshew is an upgrade on Big Dick Nick for a quarterback in the Jaguars. But at the same time, I'm going to try to pick on that guy until he, proves that he is a really capable NFL quarterback. Like, I just assume that he's likely to fold under pressure. Like, there's a good chance that he's not going to have a good week against the Texans D, which is a very good defense. Played very well against the Saints, particularly in that first half. And the Texans are at home, and they're gonna be hungry to come out and get a win after that, nail biter of a loss last night. All right, so my overhyped players for the week. My number one most overhyped player is Marquise Brown. I've teased this a couple of times, but let me break down why. Now, everybody is obviously all hot and heavy about him because if you look at his stat line from week 1 against the Dolphins, if you just look at the stat line, you're thinking, dude, this guy is a breakout player. Like, he's a rookie wide receiver who's got big speed and an offense where teams are going to be more often than not worried about stopping the run first. When people are playing the Ravens, they're not as worried about stopping the pass. But the fact is that Marquise Brown played 12 snaps. 12 snaps. And on those 12 snaps, he had, I believe, 4 receptions and 2 touchdowns, which is insane. But he played 12 snaps, and people are going to prioritize him in the waivers over somebody like a Jamison Crowder who had, so Brown had 12 snaps. Crowder had 14 receptions. He had more receptions than Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, even had snaps. He had 17 targets. He had 5 more targets than Marquise Brown even had snaps. So that kind of production that Marquise Brown gave you in week 1 is unsustainable. That was just, the Dolphins are a horrible, horrible football team that are clearly tanking. We couldn't get any pressure on Lamar Jackson, despite the fact that we always had 8 guys in the box. We played a lot of cover 0. Marquise Brown just blazed past us whenever we were running the cover 0, and Lamar Jackson made some good throws. But you cannot, that kind of production is not sustainable. If you can get, the thing about Marquise Brown is that he's going to be a lot of people's number 1 waiver priority. So that's the only way that you're going to get him this week is with your number 1 waiver priority, which I just think is better spent on somebody like Hawkinson or Crowder. If you can get Brown on the team, and he's worth stashing on the bench and seeing if his snap counts can increase over time, because he is a rookie and it was week 1. So maybe he got 12 snaps this week, but next week maybe he'll get 16, and then slowly he'll work into 50% snap share, and then maybe past that. And if he gets past 50% snap share, then he's a guy worth having on the team and worth starting. So he's a decent bench stash, but you don't want to be using your number 1 waiver after week 1, which is the top waiver pickup week of the year, on a guy who's a bench stash, high upside, extremely low floor type of a guy. Like, I expect Brown to have several weeks, unless if his snap counts significantly increase, he's going to be the kind of guy that's going to have some weeks with, 0 receptions. And you don't want that. Now, the other overhyped guy going into week 2 is going to be Adrian Peterson. A lot of people, if you're seeing that Darius Geis is, injured and he's out of the game, he's out for at least a few weeks. And obviously he had injury concern last year, tearing his ACL and being out for the whole season. You might be thinking like, oh, Adrian Peterson's going to walk into an RB1 type of a role on the Redskins. And while that's true, he's going to be the Redskins' number 1 running option. The Redskins are a terrible team. And you don't want a running back on a terrible team. Like, they're going to be playing from behind. They're not going to be, the game script is just not going to dictate touches for their starting running back. I prefer going out and getting Chris Thompson because the game script is going to benefit Chris Thompson. Especially in PPR format, Chris Thompson's actually a guy that is worth going out and getting off of the waiver wire. Adrian Peterson's not. All right, friends, thank you for tuning in. That was my week 2 preview, week 1 post-mortem show for Joel Empey Talks NFL. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting clips from this show all week, and my MMA show will be coming up tomorrow or Thursday, and I'll be posting clips from that all week long. So stay tuned for that and all my future content. Yeah, please subscribe to the channel so you can stay on top of that stuff. Hit the bell beside the subscribe button so you get notified whenever I'm posting new videos. Please comment below. Let me know anything you think about anything that I said here today. Any disagreements you have. Don't feel shy about sharing any disagreements. I'm happy to have a friendly back and forth, and I'm not worried about disagreeing with anybody. So yeah, please comment below. Please follow me on Twitter at Empey Talks. That stuff will be in the description box below. And until next time, cheers, friends.